You gonna have some opening remarks or something?
Yeah, just follow me.
I always do anymore.
All right, well, hello everyone. I'm Troy Rangel, and continuing my little series on interviewing musicians from the Quad Cities and their stories. And today I'm going to talk with my dad, Erny Rangel. There you go. And so we're going to delve into here stories of how he gets started in music and find out how this all happened. So, Dad, let me ask you, first of all, do you have any relatives who were older than you that played music?
Well, my dad played several instruments, and my sister played clarinet in high school, but that was only in high school. She wasn't a serious cat player.
What instruments did your dad play?
He played a little guitar. He played mandolin, saxophone, alto and tenor, violin. And I think he knew a little bit of keyboard.
Any aunts or uncles that played?
I had an uncle, Socorro, that played upright bass. He played with my dad. Outside of that, I had a cousin named Pete. He played with me later on.
Okay. What are some of your earliest musical memories that you have when you were just a child?
Oh boy, you asked me to go back about 70 years, and I can hardly remember yesterday. I remember my dad had a house up above the hill from where we lived at the time. I remember hearing a little song on the record player we had by Arthur Godfrey called "I Don't Want Her, You Can Have Her, She's Too Fat for Me." And I liked the melody of that, you know, it's popular at the time. But outside of that, we lived down the hill. And back in the 40s and 50s, life was totally different. There was no computers, no iPads, no iPhones or anything like that. So we had to occupy ourselves playing outside with sticks as guns, you know, played cowboys and Indians and war. But we did have a TV, and I remember hearing a song on the TV in a big band, a Latin band. And I always liked those first three notes at the time. So after we got done with the television program, I went outside to play because it was summer and it was still light. My neighbor had a little trumpet that his sister bought him. She worked at a toy factory. It was a trumpet, and the valves worked okay. So I said, "Hey, let me try that." And I had this note in my mind, these first three notes. And it was a song called "Cherry Pink and Apricot Blossom White." But the first three songs go da 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 da. And I had that, for some reason, I had that in my mind. So I fumbled around with this little toy trumpet, and I finally figured out how to do it. And that was my earliest memory. And I don't know where it came from or how it happened. I just figured it out just that a few seconds.
Okay. Did you guys have a record player around the house? Did your dad play records around the house or anything like that?
No, I think my dad played music, but I like I said, I was the youngest of six kids, so I wasn't aware of a whole lot of stuff. I knew he played music, but I never saw him go, or I never heard him play until later, a few years later.
Well, what age were you when you began to hear him play?
Oh, I don't know, 6, 7, or 8, somewhere in that neighborhood.
And what do you remember him playing?
Well, back in those days, there was a Catholic church up the hill well, actually across the street from my dad's new house. And they used to have outdoor Mexican fiestas to raise money for the church. And my dad would play there sometimes with his little trio. And sometimes he'd hire a singer. But as kids, we just ran around the grounds there, playing hide and seek and tag and all that stuff. But I do remember him playing there, and then some of those songs like Juanchete Esquiado and things like that, old Mexican songs that people remember from back in those days. And I still remember a lot of them songs now, you know, from learning with him later on. But he had him playing mandolin, my uncle Socorro playing bass, upright bass, and the first guitar player they had was Emiliano Terrones, and he played with a nice electric guitar, white one. And I always liked that, hearing that. And when they played together, I thought it was pretty good. Of course, I was only 5 or 6 or 7, something like that.
So you're saying that at the Silvis Fiestas, there was already music before the Macambos played, because the Macambos played 62 or 63, but the Fiestas had music even before that.
Oh, yes. There was a guy that, matter of fact, it was when you were born. We lived in this house above a guy named Paul Gamino, and he had an orchestra. And I remember that orchestra playing there. While we were running around playing tag, I'd stop and listen to music once in a while. I don't know why. I just something about it. But I know it was generally they would have different acts. Then they'd have a dance. They'd have some guys singing or to a record, or some lady singing or something. And there wasn't that much talent around back in those days, and no one was formally educated as far as music goes. My dad was self-taught.
But the people enjoyed it, though.
Oh yeah, they had it every year as we grew up. And as you said, the Macambos finally played there when they formed. They were asked to play there, and they played outside for the dance. It went pretty well.
So in those early days, and I'm talking like, let's say grade school for you, if you say that you really didn't have, remember Grandpa listening to music too much, what was your exposure then to music?
Well, generally it was through television or radio. And back then there was no rock and roll to speak of. It was just big band stuff, orchestra stuff, swing, stuff like that. But, I never knew anything about it. And then finally one day in grade school, they made an announcement that we're going to start a school band. So I asked my folks if I could join it, but I didn't have an instrument. So we rented an instrument, I think, or they bought me one. I played a trumpet.
And how did that go?
Well, that went pretty well from what I remember. We got in the band, and it was really, really elementary. The first couple of days we played just whole notes, trying to get our lips together and strengthened, and everything was kind of out of tune. But as we began to play a little more, we played mostly like whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, and occasional eighth notes, but hardly any syncopation. Hardly any syncopation to speak of. It was a lot of marching music. But for me, I didn't know it at the time because I didn't know much about things. I was kind of unaware of my surroundings at the time, and I didn't, being the youngest of like 6 kids, I wasn't aware of the world around me, so I didn't know what a good year was in a person. So I just knew that when we played songs in the band, I was able to pick them up real fast. And the orchestra leader, he put me in first chair. They call it first chair. Generally, the first row is for the good players, and the first chair was the better players. First and second chair were the better players. So I was chosen first chair for quite a while until another kid came, and then he asked me to play second chair. So I didn't know any better. I played second chair. And then eventually he asked me to go back in the second row and help them kids the way he put it. He said, go up back in the second row and help the other row, because in his mind, he was telling them, he was thinking that they weren't cutting it. And I thought, oh, okay, that helped my ego, you know. I didn't know anything about ego back then. So I didn't know he had an ulterior motive later on. I found out the kid that was playing first chair now was the mayor's son. And so, you know, unbeknownst to me, it was just a ruse to get him to play a solo in the band in front of an assembly or a band concert. So we played the band concert, and I did okay. The problem I had back then was my ear was in the way. So I read okay, the music, but I wasn't as proficient as I should have been.
So you would rely, and a lot of kids do this when they have a good ear. You kind of memorize it after a little while, and so then you're not really reading it anymore. You're just going off your memory of the song.
That's true. Later on, I don't know if it was the sixth grade or seventh grade. I can't remember, but we had what they call a competition. And the assignment was we each got a certain sheet music to play. And I had to go to some guy's house up the street on 4th Street. There was a trumpet player up there, and they asked him to teach me this music. So I really had a struggle with it. You know, because I'm so used to reading quarter notes and half notes and whole notes, and rarely any syncopation. And this song had lots of syncopation in it, connected eighth notes and stuff like that. For a beginner, it was really hard for me, but eventually I must have got it because competition came, and we were at a school in Sterling, I remember. And it was kind of lonely for me because I just sat by myself. All the other kids went somewhere. I never did know where they went. But my name came up, and I went to the recital room, and there was 2 or 3 judges there. And then my school teacher for music, she was the accompanist on the piano. So I started playing the song, and I was doing pretty good. And then my ear failed me, or got in the way again, because I forgot the what they call the B part of music. You know, we have an A, B, and A. Mm-hmm. I went straight from A to A. So I looked at the accompanist, and she looked at me, and we both knew what went wrong. So I just finished the tune out, went up to get my grade, and I only got a second because the guy said, "You missed the whole part." So my ear got in the way again.
So you didn't read the chart necessarily. You were going off memory, and so you missed.
Well, the song was supposed to be played without the chart. We didn't have no sheet music in front of us. But I just forgot to play the B part. I was telling myself in my mind I was doing so good, I was cooking, you know. Yeah. And I tripped over my own song.
Yeah, well, as they say, pride comes before a fall.
And that particular it did, you know. It did, but you know, it's one of the things in life you learn the lesson from. I learned later on because when I took up the trumpet, I never really hardly practiced. I relied on my ear too much because when I was in band practice, it was easy for me. You know, I always got good remarks from the orchestra leader. He always made me feel like I was doing good. He had me in the second row rather, in the first row, and then one day he asked me to play tuba because the tuba player quit. And I was only about 3 or 4 feet tall, weighed about 50 pounds. That thing weighed about 70 pounds. So I didn't know what was going on. My dad got mad at me when I told him that. He said, "You big dummy." But like I said, I didn't know it was a ruse just to get me out of the way from the mayor's son.
Hmm.
But I learned a little bit about politics and in music, you know.
So in those early days, your childhood, I should say, before high school, let's see, if you were born in 43, so you're 10 years old at 53, you're about 12 years old in 55, 13 years old in 56, when rock and roll comes on. Do you remember hearing rock and roll for the first time?
Yeah, just prior to that, they had what they call the black people had what they call jive music, you know, like scuffling stuff, you know, and it had a little beat to it, so I liked it. And when rock and roll came on, it was kind of like forbidden on the radio. I remember the days where there was no black artists played at all. It was either white guys playing black songs or, it's kind of, they call it race music back in those days, you know. So we had a radio. I remember listening to the radio a lot. I kind of liked the music. The more up tempo it was, the more I liked it. And it wasn't until much later that we actually had a phonograph, and that was later when I got it in between high school.
Right. And so what do you remember of those first rock and roll artists?
Oh, the ones that I actually remember were, I remember listening in my kitchen. There was a radio by the refrigerator. Excuse me. I remember guys like Little Richard, uh, Bill Haley and the Comets. There was a host of rockabilly players, and I really liked them because they had these guitars that kind of twanged. You know, that kind of turned me on. And you may not believe this, but back in those days, a lot of the music was instrumental. There was hardly any. There was, to hear a vocal with a rock band was kind of rare. So there was a lot of what they call teen rock and roll players. They were instrumental players, teen bands.
Did you how long did you play the trumpet, or when did you stop playing the trumpet?
Well, that's another sad story about my ear. My dad had just bought me a new trumpet in 8th grade. And during the summer between 8th grade and freshman year, they had what they call summer band. And it was all the kids from schools that were going to UT, like Kaufman Grade School, Silvis Grade School, uh, you name it. I don't know all the schools that went there, but it was several different schools. And then so the kids from all them schools that were in band, they would participate in this summer band. Well, I went to one thinking I didn't have a clue what was going to happen. And your old teacher, Melly Williams, was the band director. So when I got to the practice room, they had all the charts sitting on the music stands, and naturally I took a seat way in the back, in the trumpet section in the back. When I looked at that sheet music, I said, "Oh no, I'm in trouble now," because it was really advanced compared to what I was used to reading. So Melly counted off the tempo and off we went. And the notes I didn't know, I just kept silent. The other notes I played, but I knew right off the bat, these kids were way ahead of me, probably from lessons and practicing stuff like that, things I never did. So it was another failure.
So is that what made you stop then? Is that when you stopped playing trumpet?
Yeah, I came home, and back in those days, I had the basement to my dad's house. It's kind of a new house. I had the basement all to myself most of the time. And I would listen to rock and roll records back then. And my dad, he would practice with his trio downstairs. And one day, there was a guitar down there, an acoustic guitar. And, I was always told as a kid, don't touch that, don't do this, don't do that. So I kind of looked at it like a time bomb ready to go off. I thought if I touched it, but being a kid in time, my curiosity got the best of me, and I plucked the string. I think, oh, ding. I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. So the next day I plucked a lower string and go boom. And then I recognized one of the bongs from a rock and roll song, I don't know, my ear just told me that's the same note I heard on that rock and roll song. So I started fumbling with it. And how you put your fingers on it. And at first, the strings seemed real sharp to my tender fingers, And when my dad go to work, I'd pluck away on that guitar, And then one day I was downstairs in the basement and trying to play that thing. And he came downstairs to go to the restroom. And he looked at me, he was mad at me because I kind of gave up the trumpet. He said to me, you'll never learn how to play that thing. And that's all it took for me, in my pride.
Mm-hmm.
So back in those days, money was hard to come by. And I think I made some money topping onions in the onion fields or something like that. And I went down to the music store to buy a Guitar Method. And while I was down there, it was in Moline, I believe. When I was down there, I kind of liked the store. They had records and sheet music and instruments. And so I kind of looked in the phone book. Back then, they had phone books of where the other music stores might be in town. And like you, I went to all these different places just to look at records and music and guitars, Excuse me. So I started to haunt them places, whenever I had a few bucks in my pocket. But I got a Guitar Method. First of all, it's a Gibson Guitar Method. And I thought that's pretty easy. I kind of understood what they were trying to teach, so I liked it and I kept with it.
What grade do you think you were in at this time?
Well, talking about that, I think I was maybe a freshman because I was just starting.
Okay.
I didn't really start till my sophomore year.
Okay. And so again, I want to get back to the rock and roll and the blues. By this time now, are you finding more things on the radio to listen to now that you've got you're wanting to learn the guitar?
Yeah, I'll tell you how I used to do it. My sister had a clock radio in her room. So when they were out in the living room watching TV, about 7 or 8 o'clock at night, or even later, I'd go in their room and turn on the radio. And back in those days, the DJs, they would announce what they were going to play beforehand. So They might say something like, well, tonight we're going to have Little Richard, we're going to have Bill Haley in comments, and so and so. So I started listening to them, waiting and then waiting and waiting. Generally, what they do is to keep you on the air. They wouldn't play those songs till the last. You know, probably for ratings. I don't know. But one day I kind of lost reception, so I was looking at the back of the radio, and there was a wire back there. When I touched it, reception came back in. Excuse me. So I thought, oh, I wonder what that's all about. So I began to turn dials, and I could hear stations from far, far away by holding that little wire. It's a ground wire. And that's where I first heard blues music. There was a station called Randy's Record Mart in WLAC, I think it was Nashville, Tennessee. And I listened to that almost every night.
And who did you hear? Who do you remember hearing on that station?
Oh, the first one I remember that really struck me was a guy named B.B. King. I think he was singing something called Gambler's Blues or 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that, you know. But I didn't know who he was. I really liked the way he sang and the notes he played on the guitar, you know. They were different than rock and roll players. You know, they had this little, well, we call them now blues notes. But something about those notes really did something to me. So then I listened to, and back in those days, you could order those records. So whenever I got a little more money, I used to send for those records. I sent for records like Slim Harpo, I think Little Milton or Little Walter, Baby King. I think Sonny Boy Williamson. But you had to be careful because the rock and roll music, they did the same thing, but the only thing is they tell you what songs they were. Like it was a popular song, but it wasn't the original guy singing it. It was somebody else. Fakers,
Right.
you know.
So it might be Pat Boone doing a Little Richard song.
Well, not only that, it might be some band you never heard of, you know, some studio band singing a popular song like, say, a song like Summertime. You know, some band leader might have made that popular, but it'd be just some combo with a couple of girl singers singing it. So it was really fakey, you know. That happened to me once. I did order some rock records, and they were all fake. I threw them away.
So when you are learning guitar, it's freshman, sophomore year, did you just basically teach yourself through that book then?
Yeah, I by that time my dad wasn't mad at me anymore. You know, he kind of got over it. I would spend a lot of time studying during the summer months, and I remember specifically thinking the note that was hard to the finger that was hard to play was the pinky finger, the little finger. You know, and that was part of the lessons. You know, you used every finger in your hand. And so I thought to myself, you know, someday I might need that. So I made myself do what the lesson said instead of taking the easy way out. Like most guitar players you see nowadays, you watch them, they only use 3 fingers. Only the jazz cats use 4 because they know. So I've always been a big stickler about that, using a little finger. And so I went through that book and I went and bought me another one. I bought 2 method books, and then one time I was at one of the music stores and I saw a Mickey Baker jazz book. And I thought, oh, I might need that because I used to talk to my dad about music, you know. And back in those days, we didn't know any better. Like I said, there was no education. But he always referred to as musicians as the professional players, you know. Those are the guys that played in the big bands or nightclubs and stuff like that. So to me, being naive, I didn't know anything about that. I thought something intuitively told me I want to learn right to be a professional player. Something guided me and said, you need to learn it the correct way, the correct methods and all that stuff. And so one day, I remember talking to my dad, and he was in the backyard digging a ditch for some reason, or pulling up bricks on his old foundation. And I saw this little ad in the magazine about a school that was starting out in Boston. It's called Berkeley School of Music. And I asked my dad about going there. And like I said, he was self-taught himself, and he never heard of anything like that. He just frankly told me, "Oh, there's no money." So being, almost poor most of my life with them, I accepted it. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna learn myself. So I got that Mickey Baker book, and it taught me all the what they call advanced chords, you know. And then I think there was a method 2 to that book, and I bought that. My dad had some old music books for Mexican songs and books with sheet music, and there was one method I particularly liked, and I've never been able to find it. It had chords for guitars written like they were piano chords stacked up, note by note. And I really liked that because that would have been real easy to quit trying to read those. But I thought, oh, someday I might need that. So I started learning those. And later on, I got into classical music as I advanced. And lo and behold, the sheet music for classical music was very similar to what had in my dad's book. So it helped me out there, quite a bit. So again, I wasn't that good of a reader, and still, and I'm still taking lessons for that. But I learned enough to keep myself honest,
So when you're playing now, so let's say it's maybe sophomore or junior year of high school, and you're teaching yourself how to play, part of the joy, any musician knows this, of being that young and playing, or when it's all new, you begin to find other people in town who have a similar interest and are just learning also. And you kind of team up with them, or you find out about them. So do you have any stories of that, of where you heard of somebody else that was playing that was around your age, or you heard of somebody that knew a chord that you didn't know? Paul McCartney always tells that story of him and George didn't know a B7, and they heard somebody across town had it, so they hopped on the city bus and drove across town and figured, the guys showed them how to make that B7, and then they went back to their homes and then they started using it. So anything like that for your life?
Well, yeah, I don't remember exactly how I met him. I think it was from playing outdoors at grade school. There was some basketball hoops, and we used to go to play basketball. And there was a guy named Henry Rangel. He's no relation. But somehow we must have talked about guitars, and I told him I was trying to learn my dad's acoustic guitar. He said, "Hey, I got an electric guitar." So you do? He said, "Why don't he suggested why don't we get together and use the word jam? Have a jam session." That's what we used to call them. So yeah, okay. So he came over on a Sunday, and on my dad's guitar, I used to put my ear on the body of the guitar just to make it sound like an electric guitar. You hit that note and you could hear it very deeply. And when he came over with his guitar, he had a very similar guitar, except his was electric, and he had a big amplifier. He brought him down, we plugged it in, and I could hear that tone. I love that tone, and I could tell the tone of his guitar was similar to the tones I heard on other guitars. For example, there was a song by Robin Luke. He was a Hawaiian guy. and he played a song called, I believe the song title was something about Susie. Oh, Susie Baby or something like that. Anyway, they had guitars on the back and they sounded just like Henry's guitar. So we made a lifelong friendship with that. He was kind of a big brother to me musically. Of course, he didn't have the ear nor the talent. It became pretty apparent when we got together that we'd talk about songs. I said, "Oh, I know that song. I can figure that one out." So right off the bat, he suggested that if we want to learn any new songs, I should learn them first and teach them to him. So that's what we did. During the week, I'd learn a song and we'd get together on Saturday or Sunday and I'd show him the chords and what to play, you know. But he had a terrible memory. And he might remember half the song and then I'd have to sit there with him hour after hour to teach him the rest of the song, you know.
Sure.
But the thing about him, though, he was real nice to me. I mean, he took me to see my first rock concerts, and we went up to Chicago to buy jackets for the band that we each have got. But it was, like you said, it was real enjoyable back in those days. You know, early days of rock and roll. Everything was new.
Who did you go see with him? What acts did you guys go see?
Oh, we went to see the Champs. That had tequila.
Mm-hmm. Where at?
At the Davenport Masonic Temple, back when it was a Masonic temple. And I think we saw the Ventures together. And I remember Bill Black, after he left Elvis, he had his own band, the Bill Black Combo. Saw those guys. So it was real interesting back in those days.
So how did you guys begin to form? It started out with just you two, and did you guys get somebody else eventually to come over and play with you guys?
Yeah, I don't know how it happened exactly. I can't remember, so long ago. But it might have been through basketball again. My cousin Pete got interested and he came down to hear us. Next thing he knew, he was playing. My dad had this beat up old drum set from his band downstairs, and Pete started to play it, try to play it. You know, we didn't know nothing, but eventually he played that. You know, he played drums first. Then all of a sudden we got a gig. Henry got us a gig.
And where was that at?
That was at a Halloween get together at Silvis Park. It was with a TV celebrity known as Grandpa Happy. And we were the headliners. So the three of us got up there and we played our guitars. Just real elementary rock stuff, you know. But all the girls are screaming and crowd was howling, and that's all it took for me.
Yeah, that's all it takes for anybody. The lights are on.
The lights are on. And they threw rocks at Grandpa Happy because they wanted more rock and roll.
Did you guys get paid anything for that gig?
Yeah, we went out and bought $15 sweaters, all look-alike sweaters, and we got paid $5 or $10 for the gig. So we come out on the short end. But it was a start.
Yep. Do you remember any songs that you guys played back then?
I think we played Tequila. I think we played a song called Ranchi.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And some of the songs by a group called the Fireballs, Torquay. You know, our repertoire was limited, so we probably repeated the songs 2 or 3 times each.
Sure.
They didn't care.
Yeah. Did you guys have a name at that first gig?
The Wranglers, because all 3 of us were Wrangles.
And that was kind of a takeoff like the Jordanaires and stuff like that. A lot of bands had that type of name in the 50s.
Exactly. Henry actually thought of the Wranglers. You know, I was kind of shy. I didn't care. I was kind of shy about exposure. One of the big things about me is people always come up to me and say, "Ah, you gotta smile more," and I'm thinking to myself, I'm not an entertainer, I'm a musician. I took my music seriously and still do. So that all my life people told me, come up, you need to smile more. Well,
Well,
I'm
you,
thinking about
yeah,
I'm thinking about what I'm doing.
well, you can smile and think at the same time.
I can't do that.
Now, were there any records that you were listening to? Now that you're getting more into it, do you remember anything influencing you at that time?
Well, like I said, a lot of the stuff was instrumental stuff. I listened to a lot of Fireball music, Ventures music, anything instrumental with guitar in it, because I wanted to learn it and copy it. I did like some popular music. Uh, um, I was starting to get interested in jazz music, but my musical ear wasn't that formed yet. Um, my brother Dave would have some jazz songs and stuff like that, but I was more interested in guitarists like Barney Kessel. But I didn't have a clue as what they were playing because that
Mhm.
took more theory and harmony, and I was just an elementary player.
Yeah, you were just starting out then, and I
Yeah,
think everybody goes through that. We recognize something being a little more advanced, but at the beginning stages, we just don't know how to do it or what is even happening, with what's going on there. But we enjoy the sounds that it's making. Do you
yeah.
remember any of his artists? I know George Shearing was one of them because you and I always talk about George Shearing albums that Uncle Dave had. Remember any other artists that he was listening to?
Well, George Shearing, I particularly liked him because other jazz I couldn't really understand it, but George Shearing played some Latin music, Latin satin, things
Yep.
like that. And that I could understand the music because of playing music with my dad,
Mm-hmm.
at the time. Me and my dad used to practice a lot. So I knew Latin music or the culture of it.
Mm-hmm.
So anything that had Latin, then that was kind of easy for me to understand. But the East Coast, West Coast music the guys were playing, I didn't have a clue.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed some of it.
And
But that,
go ahead.
no, I was saying back then, even the jazz guitarists weren't as popular as rock and roll players, even
Mm-hmm.
though they were a lot better.
But back then, also, like you said, if you were with your dad, my grandpa, he was still playing at that time, and he had his little groups. The Macombos weren't a band yet, and wasn't part of the culture that people came over like on Sundays, and maybe they had food, and people like Grandpa and a few musicians would get together and play music, and so you were hearing that, weren't you?
Yeah, actually, that was it. I experienced that when I was real young, like when I was in before grade school, like 5, 6, 7 years old. We lived down at the bottom of the hill, and there would be like parties or some celebration for some reason or other. And the thing about the Mexican culture, they would my dad would provide the music in the house. Then they'd have a keg or something like that, a beer or a heart. Sometimes if my dad liked the guys, he'd bring out his special bottle. And what would happen is that they'd play music, and then as guys started to drink more and more, some of the people they're celebrating, the guys would sit in the corner and kneel down, not kneel down, but stoop down, and start singing some of the songs that they were playing or trying to sing them.
Mm-hmm.
And I took notice of that at an early age, that there was something about it that made these guys want to participate. You know, and later on, as I got to learn the guitar more and more, my dad would leave his chair in the living room, watch TV. He'd come in and say, "Let me help you with that, boy." And he'd get his mandolin out. then I would accompany on the guitar, and that became a habit.
Yeah.
Like every Sunday we get together and he'd play us Mexican. They bring out some Mexican sheet music, and the ones I liked the most was what he taught me was boleros, because I like the boleros because they have better chord progressions.
Right.
It wouldn't be just a slapping beat like what they call ranchera back then, or basically a polka. I like the boleros because some of the songs are beautiful, and my dad would always say, "These are songs that would never die, boy." I
Yeah.
show you that.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, the boleros, for those that aren't sure or just learning in music that are watching, when he's making reference to the polka type, like rancheras or corridos, what we call them, those are basically like if you're in C, there's C to G7, back and forth, and then the bridge would go to F. And so basically they're just 3-chord songs, whereas a bolero, part of the attraction is if you're learning your instrument and you're learning all your chords, you like those because if you play them properly, you're using like C major 7 to C6. You're throwing in a C sharp diminished to a D minor 7 to a G7. You might even have an F minor 6 in there. And so you get to use more chords, and your ear hears that as a youngster, or when you're new to it, oh, I like the way this sounds. Again, the people who like it simpler, you enjoy the corridos or whatever, but as a musician, you hear those extra voicings happening. And I know for myself, when I was first starting, Grandpa had those combo orc books that I used to go and practice on my own. And I'm sure you and Grandpa, those are probably books that you guys played together.
Oh yeah, we played those, and he also had a lot of song books with several pages in them. And one particular book I liked, the chords weren't symbol chords, chord symbols with a name on top. They were actually written down like piano chords. So that helped me a lot to read more than one note at a time. I could recognize a C7, I could recognize an F, I could recognize most of the basic chords, because just by looking at them, I said, oh, I know what that is. I know what this is. So I was being helped in several ways. Then he would teach me also the different types of rhythms like ranchera, corrido, bolero, huapango, montuno, and all that stuff,
Yeah, the people don't realize, or who didn't get a chance like that to, when you have a relative that, or somebody, doesn't even have to be a relative, but somebody who's older than you that can show you things like that, it makes it enjoyable also because you're learning and you're playing and you're learning at the same time. Now going back to the Wranglers with you and Henry and Pete, after your guys' first gig, now did you guys start getting more gigs then? Or play any high school assemblies or anything? Or
well, actually what happened was my dad, he seemed to take a little bit more favor and interest in my development. And one day I came downstairs in our basement where I hung out, and he had a 1961 SG down there.
Mhm.
And Gibson A110 or something like that, a little amp, And I was happy as lark, I really was. I didn't know at the time what it would be. Someday it would be wanted vintage instrument, but I was happy as lark. And then I told him, I just happened to mention one day, this amp is just kind of small for we're playing high school things now. So the next time I went down to the basement, he had a Fender piggyback Bandmaster amp with two 212s, I think it was, or 215s. And he had a Fender Bassman piggyback. And that's what I needed,
Yeah.
And at that time, my dad also had or I don't know how he did it, but he got an EB2, I believe, a hollow body bass. Sunburst, and Pete picked that up, and I found out right away Pete had a good ear too. But like him, like me, the problem he had was he wasn't very good scholastically, so he couldn't keep his mind on the books. So I had to show him everything by ear, but usually it only took one time for him to learn, and he had it. He was better at it than Henry was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so the three of you started doing gigs then?
What's that?
The three of you started to do gigs?
Yeah, we got quite a few gigs. Played for what they call teen parties or teen dances. You know, one thing I particularly remember was back in those days, the teenagers had a lot of trouble. You know, they have fights in the streets and gangs, stuff like that. You know, they call them rumbles. And our neighborhood people wanted to get us corralled, so they wanted to have a dance. Excuse me, throat's getting sick. And so they talked Frank's Pizza on 9th Street to supply pizza for a teen dance at the Ship's Wheel in East Moline. We played for that, and I had to get off work for that. I would think I was working already. And it turned out pretty well. And later on, Henry had some connections, and he was able to get a black saxophone player and a white saxophone player. And we actually got another drummer, a kid that played with me in high school. I heard he played drums, so I asked him one day about joining or coming over for practice and joining the group. And he's a white guy, and he said, yeah. So he turned out, and he was good. Technically, he was okay. So we had a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 piece band by then.
Okay. And what were you guys called now by this time? Because you're probably not the Wranglers anymore.
No, Henry changed the name to the Rockin'
Okay. And was Pete still with you guys?
What's that?
Was Pete still with you guys?
Yeah, Pete was still with us. We got a lot of high school after the basketball game dances were a lot of our gigs. We played a lot of the almost a whole year of dances after the high school basketball games. Yeah. I remember one particular year, one particular dance we went to play. We started off the music and something was terribly wrong. And I figured out that when we tuned our guitars, they were an octave lower than it should have been. So we had to take a break real quick, and I figured out how to tune them up correctly, to 440. And then we got on. Then we did fine. But it's just those things you learn. I don't know if Henry started tuning up or what. I don't remember what caused it.
What about that story? I remember you telling me a story when you guys played for a school assembly, and you guys had
that's terrible, Troy.
Poor girl got jilted that day.
Well, me and the drummer Dean, they asked us to play for an assembly, and we said okay. And I was going to play this song called Torquay or Bulldog by the Fireballs. But I thought to myself, well, we don't have a bass player, we don't have no rhythm player, nothing, just us two, And so the assembly director was kind of like one of these big time show producers, and he used to dress around like these French guys, with a scarf and everything, I don't know if he's gay or what, But anyway, he said, by the way, no matter what happens, if they applaud too much, don't play any more music. Just get off the stage. So we started to play our song when our turn came up, assembly. And, you know, we had no awareness of time or anything like that. So we played the song and the crowd went wild. I mean, they were cheering and stomping out in the aisles and everything, like yelling more and more and more. So I looked at Dean, the drummer. I says, "What are we gonna do?" He looked at me back, shrugged his shoulders, said, "Play it again." So I started playing it again, and the crowd went wild again. You know, throwing stuff and throwing their lunch sacks up in the air and all that stuff. You know, just crazy. So later on, I saw this gal walking down the aisle all by herself, carrying a broom, and she had kind of like her homemade costume on. You know, she's like a sweeping lady. You know. So I heard later on that what had happened because we played that extra encore, that cut that lady's time off, that gal's time off. So she never got to perform her routine. So you know that I if the band director or producer, whatever you call him, would have told us, "Hey, there's another act behind you. Don't play anything," then I wouldn't have played. But you had to be there, Troy, to see the crowd going crazy. You know.
Didn't he talk to you guys afterwards and say you guys were amateurs or something like that?
Yeah, I saw him walking down the hallway shortly after that gal turned the corner. He comes by with his what they call them hats. Those French guys wear the
Beret?
beret. Yeah, he's wearing his little beret. He says to me, "Amateurs, vague amateurs, vague amateurs."
So did you guys do any gigs out of town?
Yeah, Henry booked several school gigs. They were kind of strange because we went to play at a lot of these farm towns like Sebula, Delmore, Iowa. But that's kind of strange because the band we were with, I think Henry and I were there with a different band, but no, no, we were together. And nobody was there. They they'd gone dance another room or something, or gone to eat or something like that. It's strange. You know, these farmers didn't know what to do. So we played several out of town gigs, you know. One gig I remember playing that was down Fort Madison. This guy that knew my dad and had hired my dad played. He asked me about playing down there. And I thought, well, I only knew one or two Mexican songs, you know. And then we had two saxophone players and they didn't know anything at all. So we went to Fort Madison and you know how those crowds were, they were massive, you know. And we had our blue BB King jackets on, you know, and we looked the part anyway. So. But I started playing what was that song my mom all likes? Oz de Pancha, I think is the name of the song. And it was a folk beat, and there's a couple guys dancing, but that was it. And we played rock and blues songs and stuff like that, you know. Peter Gunn, you know, that people don't know what we didn't know what to expect, and they didn't know what to expect, so it was kind of weird. Another thing.
You're learning at that point. You're learning what to do, what not to do, what the crowd wants, what the crowd doesn't want. Everybody goes through that when they start doing gigs. They begin to learn, okay, we don't do this here and keep these tunes out of here, and these people like these type of songs. It's all a learning process, really, when you're first starting out like that.
Yeah, sadly, it was a two-day gig, but during the daytime, we got drunk. Barely got sober by the time the gig was starting to start. We had to roust everybody up just to, well, actually, me and Dean and I think me and Dean were the only ones that got tore up.
Yeah, that
know
sounds
me,
more accurate.
Yeah, you know me, I couldn't hold my liquor anyhow.
Yeah, and so this is in high school, right? You guys are in high school.
Yeah, of course, but But we went did the gig, and they liked it better the second day.
So what was it that you really Phil says you got to shine for the folks that
What's that?
Phil wrote you got to shine for the folks.
What was the question?
No question, he made a comment. You got to shine.
Yeah. Oh, I did.
So what was it that you liked about the guitar?
Well, actually, I like the sound of it. When I put it to my ear, that acoustic that my dad had, there was something that did it to me more than the trumpet. I mean, I like the trumpet, but the guitar was more of a challenge to play. It still is, because on the trumpet, you have one valve to play a certain note, maybe two valves to play sharp or flat. But on the guitar, say you have a C note, you might have 5 or 6 places to play a C note. So in your reading sheet music, you gotta quickly decide where you're gonna play, what position you're gonna play at. You know, of course, it was popular back when I was a teenager. So that's what I liked about it. I never thought about being anybody special. I do remember one time sitting down on the couch, laying down on the couch in my dad's basement, and I was half dozing. I don't know if I was conscious or not. I'd been listening to 45 records, and I saw myself playing on a stage. This was before I played guitar. I literally saw myself playing on the stage, playing music, the guitar. When I woke up, I wondered, what is that all about? And that was way before I started picking up the guitar strings. It's like a premonition.
We're going to get ready to close up here, but I got a few more questions for you. You talk about, again, because of your age and being back in those days, in the early days of rock and roll, that you could go somewhere and listen to the records before you bought them.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. A lot of the music stores or record stores, there was one in East Moline, and they would have a booth. You take a record out of the stand, and they'd say, go in that booth, and there'd be a record player with a little spindle for a 45, you know. And I don't know if you could listen to LPs or not, but they let you listen to 45s. And you could listen to the record and decide if you want it. And then if you want it, you bought that record, the one that you played. That way they didn't have a bunch of scratched records, you know. But there was a record store in East Moline, on 7th Street, where the McConnells played a gig up there, up top, where you met Pancho.
Oh, above the old Barber College?
Yeah, right there at the Barber College, there was a record store there. Then there was one in Moline, one or two in Moline. I know there was some in Rock Island, but I never went over there. Cost too much on the bus.
Also, what do you remember as far as practicing? Did you have a regular routine, or did you just, how you felt each day, or during the week or whatever? Just your own personal practice of, say, not learning songs, but just practicing, the instrument itself.
Well, remember I told you that my dad talked about professionals, and something intuitively told me that's what I wanted to do. And I don't know why. I learned right away that there was an easy way out, but I learned that I didn't want to be a 3-chord picker. I wanted to know what I was doing. So I meticulously studied the instrument as an instrument of study. I learned how to form the chords. I learned the chords before I knew the theory behind them. But that was my goal, and I used to practice during the summer times, at least 8 hours a day. I'd start about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, My dad and mom were already off or at work, and I'd go to 8 or 9 at night in that room, Grandpa's room,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd pray. I'd practice and practice and practice. And if something stuck too hard, it was too hard for me, I'd take a break and have something to eat or something. Then I'd come back and challenge it again. But I knew it in my mind. I wanted to be serious about it.
Were there any songs that you enjoyed playing that you remember back in the 50s that you enjoyed? Because you graduated in 61, so your playing days are right from the beginning of rock and roll, until say 61 is the era that we're talking about, because we're taking you up through your high school years. So do you remember any songs that you enjoyed playing back then on the guitar?
Not any songs in particular, but I did like melodious songs with good melody. I did like the bolero songs that my dad taught me the most because, like I said, the chord changes, stuff like that. Um, there was lots of songs that I enjoyed, but I can't remember one in particular that I enjoyed more than the other because it was music. To me, it was music, and that was the enjoyable part. It was a lifestyle almost for me.
Did you enjoy Link Ray's Rumble?
Oh, everybody learned that one. I never did figure out the chords to it later. He played them backwards.
What about Elvis? Elvis was around then. Did you enjoy him when you heard him first?
Yeah, Elvis, I got this thing about singers and performers. When they first start out, I like them. But when they put the violins to them and the orchestra and all that stuff, then I don't like him anymore. But I liked his Sundays, his records from the Sunset series.
Mm-hmm.
And I like Scotty Moore's playing. And I really like the delay they had on the delay uh, effect they had on his guitar.
So would you say "That's All Right, Mama" or "Heartbreak Hotel" a couple years later? Would you then sit at home and try to learn that solo on the record or buy the record or something like that?
Yeah, I'd have to attribute my Gibson guitar methods and that I was learning on, and my dad's teaching me, and my ear. It generally didn't take me 5 minutes to learn them songs because I could pick them up real easy.
Yeah, I remember I told you the story that when your brother, Uncle Boss, was sick towards the end of his life there, and I was at the house with him talking to him one time, just him and I, and he said he was always amazed that you would hear a song and then go away and you'd learn it, within 5 or 10 minutes, you'd come back playing that song, whatever song it was.
Yeah.
And, I know we know now because of music that if it was early rock and roll, there wasn't too much to it. So, of course, people think it's harder than what it is, but still it takes something to be able to learn, the songs by ear and things like that. Do you remember playing and just the enjoyment of playing, I guess is what I'm trying to say, of a gig, enjoying the gigs, the actual gigs, and the freshness of them when they're all new like that?
You cut out on the last part of your sentence.
Did you enjoy when you're new at it and you're first doing gigs? Did you enjoy, even though it's not as professional as you do it later on after you get more experience? Did you enjoy that newness of it, of the gigs for the first time? When you're first learning how to do that with Henry and Pete and Dean, and even though, like I said, it's not polished yet, but it's just the excitement of it. Did you guys go through that yourselves?
Well, yeah, I did. I enjoyed the sound of it, but I always felt like something wasn't right. I think my ear was telling me, maybe the drums were too loud or the rhythm guitar was offbeat a little or something. I always found the flaw, instead of being satisfied with what I was listening to or playing. You know, I always found some fault somewhere. So I was kind of critical about the situation back then. I enjoyed it though. I mean, it was music, so
Critical on yourself?
whatever I heard, I mean, it could have been myself, could have been, you know, the one instrument being louder than the other. Could have been a multitude of things.
Now, did you have any musical heroes back in those days in your high school years?
As far as performers,
Yeah.
yeah, I listened to a lot of Chet Atkins. Never could play like he plays, but I liked his production, the way he played almost flawlessly, and I liked his choice of songs because they were melodic, and the tone of his guitar. He always had a great tone. The guy could play anything, you know. I liked classical music. I got into classical music, and I like Andres Segovia. Years later, I got into flamenco music. Um,
Yeah, well,
and
I'm
I like,
talking during high school.
oh, during high school, yeah, I'd say Chet Atkins and a lot of the rock players. For me, anybody that I could learn from, I enjoyed.
All right. Well, I think we're going to leave part one here. We'll pick up part two maybe next week. Take you from your after high school, and you begin to form the combos. You play in nightclubs and things like that, and where that went on to. For those that are watching that don't know you, just adding this to it is how many guitar players, especially Mexican guitar players, that you influenced to play the guitar in the Quad Cities. That they either saw you as a youngster, and then that made them say, "Hey, I want to do that," while you were on stage. I've heard stories like that all my life, you know, from somebody. "Oh, I saw your dad playing when I was just a little kid, and that made me want to play," or something like that, you know. And so just that, to me, it's neat, not just particularly for you, but for any musician, that how that works, that we have an enjoyment for music or whatever, and then it inspires somebody else to want to go do it. Just like you heard, let's say, Pres Prado or whoever, you know, and something made you want to do something, you know, with it. And it's neat how that chain or cycle keeps going and going and going for people.
Yeah, because my dad, when he had his early trio, you know, he had this guy, Emiliano Terrones, playing a nice, beautiful white, I think it was a white Gibson 335, or I'm sorry, 175. It looked like that. But anyway, he wasn't a very accomplished player. But back in those days, those Mexicans, the old Mexicans, they knew all the old songs, you know. But I liked the tone of the guitar back then, you know, with the amplifier and all that. That turned me on.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Well, all right. Well, everyone, this is my dad, Ernie Rangel, and that's just taking him from his beginning in music up through his high school years. Did we miss anything, Dad, in those up through your high school years? Anything that I didn't touch on that you want to make notice of?
Well, just one little item that I learned a lot later on from that band director using politics, you know, to get the mayor's son on to play first chair. So it was kind of obvious, but I was too young to know. It was obvious that he was moving me out of the way. You know, nobody wants a Mexican as first chair, you know, in their band.
He's not in those days.
No, it's a lot of prejudice back in those days, and the mayor's son got the call, you know, and then he even got a little 4 or 8 bar solo in one of the marches, you know. But I remember the assembly when we played that. You know, my mom and dad went, and You know, it was okay. I did my part okay, but the things that bother me the most is forgetting that part during that competition. That beat part that really stung me, you know.
Well, it just showed you
But
you're
you know,
human.
yeah, you know, as kids, you don't know what you don't even know what you're feeling. You know, you don't know your surroundings. You're just like an animal that goes by senses, you know. So I wasn't very aware. Like today, you know, my grandson Isaiah, in his world, they got computers, iPhones, iPads. They can spend all day watching videos, you know. Back in our days, all we had was sticks and slingshots, and we had some lucky enough to have some old tires, and we'd make our go-kart, you know, out of wood, planks and everything like that. It was all makeshift stuff. So when music came along, it was quite a diversion for me. I enjoyed it. I enjoy music today. You know, I still practice, as you know.
Yep. Well, if it's any consolation, all the political stuff in the school bands still goes on to this day. So the the
Yeah,
school, the school band teachers got to deal with whoever's in charge of them, and you know they got to keep their jobs and stuff like that. So it's part
yeah.
of what you deal with. It's how it goes in
They
life.
gotta they gotta
It's what
shine too.
happen. It's just what has to happen. All right. Well, we're going to cut off from there, and so we'll join next week for next week or in 2 weeks. We'll do part two. Thanks everyone for watching.
Thanks.